Hey, what's going on? Little post-production editing here. So one of the things I forgot to mention for this video is one of the main reasons that I'm making this, and maybe I mean I alluded to it quite a bit, is these guys basically they play at a really high level compared to a lot, the majority of the player base. Um, I kind of dabble in some of this higher level stuff, but I generally play at the more casual level, and they had mentioned, hey, they don't really have anyone to chat with because a lot of their group that they play with play at this really high level. Well, and like I said, me playing at the more casual level, I wanted to give my takes on some of these, and I'm gonna tag these guys in this video, probably post it on their thing, and maybe they'll watch it, maybe they won't, but it'll give them somewhere to at least someone extra to look at and say, hey, this is what my thoughts are on this as a more casual player, because we don't really have a lot of voice from casual players in World of Warcraft, mainly because we're a lot of us are time limited. We've got full time jobs and stuff, and streaming isn't our job, but having a little bit of extra time, I wanted to go ahead and make this video and get it out there, and hopefully some good comes of it. Today, I just wanted to I'm going to react to some content from the Poddy C with Dratnos, Max, and it looks like the head corral on for today. Um, so for starters, a little bit about me. I kind of play at a more casual level in World of Warcraft. Uh, what was it for season three? For season three, I did pug AOTC, which is ahead of the curve. Got Keystone Master, ran all the way up to a plus 20. Kind of did Keystone Master and AOTC for all of Dragonflight except for season 4. I haven't done Keystone Master yet, but I'm really really not interested in that content. Truthfully, I kind of prefer doing raid or just queuing in for the LFR. I think since Legion, so for BFA, Shadowlands, and yeah, so BFA and Shadowlands, and even really, yeah, since the kind of the end of Legion, I've been just kind of an LFR hero. Um, Prior to that, I started World of Warcraft in 2009 playing a Shadow Priest. So I've got a small take on that kind of here at the end. We'll come back with that. I'll come back to that here in a minute. But I played just about every class in the game at some point in time. Started out playing, right there at the end of BC. Really didn't get into raiding content until Wrath of the Lich King. Ended up raiding heroic 10 man with a holy pally back then, kind of right before Blizzard came in and crushed healers into the ground. And you kind of had to rekit and retool everything because before you just during that time you just beaconed the tank and then you were just spamming flash shield the whole time. But after they nerfed that into the ground where you had to use more of your toolkit and whatnot, I kind of stepped back from the game for a little bit. I think part of that was due to having to change all the gear, all the gems and everything. Like you just kind of had to restart all that over again right there at the end of an expansion. So wasn't really that fun. Got into Cataclysm a little bit and just decided that was enough. Walked away from it until basically pre-patch for MOP came back from Mist and played through all of that, all of WoD, Legion, kind of been here ever since. So I've stepped away from the game kind of a few times, or I just dwindled down to like one character, just do an LFR, get your tier set, and then logged out. So I think Legion had a lot of great things, especially for more of a casual type player. That's probably a whole different chat for a whole other day. But that I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction about me, who I am, and kind of the content I play in the game and whatnot. So right now I'm going to pull this up onto the screen, and yeah, as you can see, I kind of had a bunch of notes here in the back. I don't know why that just did that, but whatever. I'll move these over to the side. And so kind of here's going to be my starting point. I'm going to play this clip, and then maybe I didn't need to do that. We'll just do this. I'll play this clip, and then I will talk about it from there.
If they're also like rethinking Mythic Plus, something that I think is very interesting about raids is that they have like time gated achievements for them. So like a way to look at this would be like you can get cutting edge or Hall of Fame, right? There's a Hall of Fame is like you need to be one of the first teams to do this thing. The race to world first is the race to world first, right? Is there a world of Mythic Plus? Like right now, the Race to World First equivalent, the Hall of Fame equivalent, is figured out in the last minutes of the season, which lasts 5 or 6 months. Is there a way to add some kind of cool, prestigious, difficult? I want to be the first person to do this as part of the new.
So my reaction to this is there's definitely some good thought process here. The problem is the timing. So if you have a time limited event like this, you're going to have a lot of guilds that aren't, in these top 10 guilds, especially like, Max is race to world first. So they're done with the content within the, with the raid within the first few weeks. So they could literally just go focus M plus after that. For a lot of guilds, like the guild I'm in, I think they're generally around the top 500, top 3 to top 500. And I mean, it takes a while to clear all that mythic content for them. So yeah, they'd be doing Mythic Plus at the same time to get gear, but if you've got a time limited event like that, I mean, you kind of get to a point where like you got to pick what you're doing. You're either everybody's doing M plus or everybody's doing Mythic rating. And Mythic rating, I think Mythic rating's hard enough for the casual population that's not getting paid to play a game essentially. That I don't know how well that would work for most of the people outside the top 10 who get it, within the first month or so. Get the mythic raid done in the first month. So I don't know. That was just kind of my thoughts on that, and going to continue on. Ooh, grabbed the wrong one.
Games, oftentimes the game designer will give you rewards to lead you in a certain direction, right? They have given you nothing to lead you above a 10.
Okay, so in this one they were talking about doing Mythic Plus, and kind of giving some kind of reward or some kind of incentive to go above the plus 10 level there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and play this, let it go for a little bit, and then I'll stop it and we'll continue on.
10 right now. You get your portals, you've got your tier piece already, you got your keystone achievement, and then it's like, why on earth would you go above this? Does it give you better gear? No. Does it give you better, like more crests? No. Does it? It gives you nothing outside.
Gives you
of
less
the,
crests usually as well.
yeah,
It's like less per hour, and then if you deplete, you don't get any. It's cursed.
yeah, yeah. So there's nothing in the game that makes you want to do that other than a title that happens 5 months from now. So why are you doing this thing? You only do it because you love the game, right? And there's a lot of things that people would love to do that they never even know to do because the game doesn't push them in that direction. So I would just love to see that chasm that you spoke of. If they're going to work on something for High Mythic Plus, sure, make it better for those people that already exist, but also give people a ramp to get there. Give them the Naimus and the Laridars and the Smolderons, as you would say, to lead you to what is the Tindral rather than you know, just expect you to like get all your stuff, and then it's like this massive jump. Like I think there's a bridge that could be had there.
So to some degree, I agree with what he's saying, especially at the top end of things and getting more people into the top end of things. And this is kind of in response to Blizzard going off and saying, you know, during one of the recent interviews that essentially what they said was, you know, hey, participation week over week in Mythic Plus, it looks good, it's holding. And while that's true, it's genuinely people who are chasing the title. You know, a lot of those people are the people that are chasing that title at the end of the season. And, you know, you've got a few people in there gearing. And I think truthfully, if there was other ways to get gear more efficiently than M Plus, I think a lot of people would probably just step away from M Plus altogether. I'm one of those people. For me right now, M Plus is not fun. There's nothing fun about it. The affixes aren't fun. I don't like running the same dungeon over and over and over and over and over. I would much rather queue up, go into a raid, and try to be in the top 5 of that raid. You know, even if it's just a random group of people that got thrown together. Like, I would much rather do that than I had go into M Plus. It doesn't really feel all that great. Some of it's kind of been the classes that I've played. Obviously, like I said, I've played a lot of Shadow Priest and played a lot of recently got into Mistweaver Monk. Played Og for all of season 3, and I mean, Og was all right. It was something that, I mean, you pretty much just got brought to everything, and you know, as long as you were remotely competent, I mean, you were doing all right. So it just, I don't know, it just really wasn't. It still isn't that all that fun, especially like trying to heal, because after I got into Mistweaver, going into M Plus just doesn't feel fun. And I mean, I actually play a fistweaver monk, so I use ancient teachings to do the melee damage and whatnot, and it's fine a lot of times, but if you're in a pug that doesn't understand the range of fistweaver, and you've got a tank that just grabs everything and runs, not understanding that a lot of your heals are based on you being able to get damage out, then the group starts falling over and everybody's like, you know, hey, what's going on? But that's part of this whole damage reduction and the massive amount of damage output that these dungeons and stuff are doing right now. And so, like I said, it's just really not fun. If there was a better way to get crest, especially like aspects and stuff, you know, crest and gear, you know, at a comparable speed, like I said, I'd never step foot in M Plus again. I just wouldn't. It's not for me. It's really not that great of content. But to Max's point, my kind of where I'm at in agreement with that is you definitely want some way to step up and ramp up into that content without just having to make that astronomical leap. And I think one of the big issues for that, and I'll get into this later, probably has to do with the add-ons. And that, like I said, that'll be a conversation for later. But for right now, that's just kind of my take on M Plus. So this will tie in a little bit later to one of my other thoughts. But overall, like, World of Warcraft's kind of lost a lot of its repeatability in its gameplay. You know, the removal of artifact power, or, you know, whatever it was in BFA and whatever it was in Shadowlands, constantly chasing that power up, like, not, while that wasn't fun, you know, to have that never ending power gain, it's taken away that repeatability. And I think this X-Pack, so for Dragonflight, I saw less people go into the previous season's raid than has ever happened before, all the way back to at least Mist of Pandaria when LFR really got ramped up. And even then, you had a way to upgrade gear, to change gear, to get higher level gear by going into those old rates. So you might go in for a day and you might queue up just every single raid on your character, you know, every single LFR wing, and do all of them. So if there's, you know, you had Terrace, you had Mogushan, the vaults, whatever the heck that one is, I can't remember. Then there was what, Throne of Thunder, Heart of Fear. You might go in and queue up every single one of those and just do them all back to back to back. And you were doing that so you could upgrade your gear and whatnot. And yes, we can upgrade gear now, but it's not the same way to where you can actually get the upgrades and then really be able to progress into like that higher level content. I mean, you can to some extent, but it's still not, it's not going to carry you in there because people are immediately looking at your gear. If you're queuing up for normal and you're in, even if you're in maxed out LFR gear, by the time you get that in the season, people are looking at your gear and they don't really want to pull you into normal because they can grab a guy who's been running Mythic Plus the whole time and he's basically heroic geared, bring him into the normal, and then they just go crush the normal raid out, you know? And so it's kind of a problem with the repeatability. And like I said, I will get into that more here later in this video. So stop that one for now, and this one here.
M plus, they did mention one thing. There was.
So this one was, they were talking about the different stops and stuff that classes have, and the interrupts and stops. And I'll let that play.
One more question. We broadly covered the first two. The third one was about stops. Dratnos, do you have that pulled up? Can you, just for the viewers, can you kind of summarize what that question was asking, and then also just generally their response to it?
Yeah, okay. So Wowhead was basically like, look, stops have been a big thing, and this has got a big imbalance on classes with and without stops and players who use and don't use them. Are there changes coming in War Within? And Ian and Morgan Day basically were like, yeah, we've talked about this a bunch. Stops is something that has sort of come up over the last few expansions, but it's not really how WoW mobs work or the rules are supposed to work for WoW. In general, you're supposed to have a spell go on CD if it gets cast or if it gets kicked, but not if you as a player get stunned during a cast, for instance, that cast doesn't go on CD, right? And so they're going to change it.
So one of my thoughts that I had with this is, let me grab a drink real quick. As far as stops and CC and all that stuff, I mean, I think it's pretty evident not all classes are created equal. I took a Destro Lock into a +4 delve the other day. It was, what's the name of that? Takrathon Abyss. And not having a viable instacast CC, you know, because a lot of theirs isn't instacast. You have Fear, which is on a cast, but you also have Mortal Coil, which is an instant cast, but it fears the target and they may run into another pack. It was absolutely brutal in there because you didn't have that CC to just hard stop a cast. And I mean, I got absolutely annihilated in that +4, which is wild to think about. Granted, I'm not a professional Warlock player and I was just doing some testing, but at a +4 level, when you're sitting at the same item level as the content, I mean, you shouldn't be going in there and getting annihilated by every single trash bag. Like, there was definitely some tuning that needed to happen in that, but not being able to hit that CC often led you to blowing your defensive cooldowns just to stay alive. So now you you dealt with one pack and all your defensives are on cooldown and you're just sitting there waiting. I ended up having to switch over to destruction just so I could have that extra, a good extra kick and a little bit more basically survivability overall. And having to switch specs like that to go into a delve that they've created to be something that the everyday player can go in, plus they can progress and whatnot. And it's supposed to kind of sort of get harder on the way up. Definitely was basically it's not what I was expecting, especially for the first delve that I ever tested. So that was kind of my point on this interrupts and CCs as to what they're talking about is a lot of the classes don't have that same level, and it's really kind of not fun when they build content for you to have those CCs that a lot of classes do have, but you don't have, because there's a couple classes like the Warlock that, yeah, they've got good CCs and good stops, but they're, hey, a double fear sounds great until the targets are running all over the place, and you really don't need them running all over the place into content that can, or into a trash pack that come in and just insta wipe you, And so other than that, you got, what is the Shadow Fury, whatever, that's on a 2 or 3 second cast time. Like, that really sucks. Like, it just didn't feel good at all. So that's something that I need to take that feedback, and I also need to put it, towards the class forum and just, kind of say, hey, this really didn't feel that great because you don't have the same level of CC and stop, as a lot of these classes. And I think one of the worst, say one of the worst, is probably one of the best is the monk class. The amount of CC and stop that they have is just absolutely incredible. For what their overall toolkit is, and I hate saying that because I really enjoy playing it, but for what their overall toolkit is, they have a lot of get out of jail free cards, basically. So I've actually got some videos that'll be coming up of me doing some deals on a fistweaver monk, and even with it being at the lower level, I mean, I had absolutely zero trouble going through there. So it was a completely different experience than it was on the warlock. Anyway, that was my take on this, and we'll continue on. Let me see what I had for notes on this. The amount of things going on in dungeons. That's kind of what they were talking about here. But I also feel this, after doing some of the raid testing, feeling this in the raids. I think this raid's probably going to have the highest movement I've seen in a raid ever. It's probably one of the higher movement raids that they've ever done. And at this point, it almost feels like you're in the Elden Ring dodge simulator. Like, dodge, and then, try to attack and stay alive and everything. And while some of that's fun to some extent, especially, for a team like Echo, for a team like Liquid to go in and do that, yeah, it's a lot of fun. But I mean, I was testing this on the heroic level, and granted, we didn't have all the mechanics down the way we should have because we just plugged it together versus, hey, these guys that are race to world first teams going in there and plugging together or grouping together and doing it. I went in and did a pug, and it was just random people, but we were able to figure out some of the mechanics, but it's still overall, it just kind of felt like, especially on a Shadow Priest, like I was running for my life. You get on something like a melee class, and it's not going to be, I really don't think it's going to be as bad. Maybe Death Knight probably won't be as fun because their their overall lack of mobility, but which I haven't tested them. I don't know if they got anything extra in their toolkit for the hero talents. Haven't read over that, but if they didn't, I mean, that boss, which one was it? This one right here, Nexus Princess Kiveza or Kiveza, however you want to say it. This one right here was just, I mean, there was a point where I just kind of stopped casting just to try to dodge everything, just so I could see it, to kind of know what was coming and know where to move. But I'm gonna go ahead and play this, and then we'll kind of go on talking about
From
it.
a first run through in Mythic Plus, it seems like they have amped up the amount of things that every single trash pack is doing yet again in this expansion. And I think we've reached this like critical mass of the amount of things going on. And I want to echo something I think I even brought up on this podcast at some point, where it'd be really interesting to see what it looks like when a dungeon is designed where nothing can be stopped. Just so you could see, Blizzard could see maybe what the adequate amount of things that should be happening to you is. Like when you allow yourself to stop mechanics, and then it's like kind of like an arms race. Now you're going to keep adding mechanics so stops make sense. It's like, think of a raid boss, right? Think if like your tanks, two people in your raid at tops, had the ability to kick a raid mechanic, right? Where you can just add it, I don't know, on a 2-minute cooldown, one of your tanks can just interrupt any single raid mechanic, right? That would be 10 times harder to design fights, right? Because you're not allowed to interrupt raid mechanics, you can curate an experience of what a fight is supposed to be and feel and play like without worrying about you stopping the boss from doing things. It's why Shadow Meld doesn't work in raid, right? So you apply that to dungeons. I think over time they're like, man, they're just like stopping everything. Let's just keep adding more. I would love to see what it looks like right now when you do a dungeon at a decently high Mythic Plus level and you just don't stop anything. And Blizzard sees what these packs individually are all trying to do to you. It's crazy. Now, I don't think you're ever going to run into a point where nothing can be stopped, because there's a bunch of stops in the game and Blizzard wants to design things for you to use them on. And there's also not a scenario where you're going to stop every spell ever, and that's why they're doing this. There's some middle ground that makes sense, and I just don't know what that looks like, where people aren't complaining that stops are OP while also like Blizzard isn't happy because the dungeons don't do anything. You know, like where is the middle ground of what stops should even look like in WoW? In a
And I'm gonna tag off what he's saying here. It kind of absolutely feels like that, and like I said, a lot of these dungeons feel like, I mean, you got to be stopping everything, and they also feel like, you know, a dodge simulator, and that's really not all that fun. One of the things that I kind of come back to is, you know, especially every time we do time walking, when you go to time walking and you do like, I believe it's, what is it, Sun Reaver's Terrace? Let me look that up. Sun Reaver's Terrace. Dungeon. Magister's Terrace. Images. Yeah. Yeah. This one. So as you're kind of going through this, I think one of the things that I enjoyed about this dungeon in particular was the way the mobs kind of feel like they're casting a heal. There's another one that's casting damage, and you kind of just, you know, at the time, what is it, time running time, whatever it is that we're doing, you don't really need to stop those. You can just kind of go in and blast through those. But the way that content was originally, I mean, it was kind of necessary that you needed to stop that. Like if you know, you didn't stop the healer, it kind of ramped up on just doing another heal, another heal, another heal. And the damage really didn't get too crazy. But I felt like the way these trash packs were designed, the way these ads and stuff were designed, were significantly better than what we have currently in Dragonfly and going into the War Within. I feel like there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from this old content, where just the way these were, like it required you to do something, but it wasn't like absolutely game breaking and a metric ton of damage come out and just insta wiped you if you didn't get it down. But you still you had a little bit of time, so if somebody made a mistake, you could correct that mistake and then go ahead and get that trash bag down and move on. But if you never corrected that mistake, you would eventually pay for it. And that's, I feel like that's a better design philosophy than what we have currently. So that was my thoughts on that. This is 42. And this one, this was, they were talking about raid buffs and shamans not really having raid buffs.
In DK, and then 2 specs of shaman. Patreons for continuing to ask about raid buffs, but they had a very ridiculous answer to a raid buff question. They basically WoW had asked, you know, the same thing. Like, hey, raid buffs are a thing, and they mentioned 2 classes not having one, which is technically true in DK, and then 2 specs of shaman. But I've always felt like just putting, when you're talking about reasons you would bring a class to a raid, putting DPS and Ellie Shaman in the same sentence as DK is nonsense, even though they technically don't. Like, grip is just a very real thing. Yes, blood does it more than the other ones, but whatever. Like, it's still a thing. DKs are in raids all the time. Ellie Shamans aren't, right? Let's just fucking stop putting them in the same sentence. All right, so their response was like, yeah, we think maybe we'll do something. It doesn't always have to be it's the same answer as always. We don't always have to like add a raid buff to make stuff to make you want to bring classes. And I think they had a line where it was like, you know, if you're putting in a mythic raid group, you should want one of every class. And then once you have that covered, you should look at who's available. And then they said, well, we don't want to do another raid buff because then it would too heavily force less choice. It would heavily force less choice in composition forming. And that's just blowing my fucking mind because okay, you want to have less choice in composition forming? I'll give Frank a link to this, a spreadsheet that I made that shows the elevation of raid buffs from expansion to expansion, and how in this expansion they added 2 evoker raid buffs and they added a second paladin one. Why?
On this, I mean, kind of 100% agree here with kind of what Max is saying in the essence of like, why did we add more raid buffs when we didn't really need to add more raid buffs? And if you're going to add them, why not add them to classes that don't have that to bring to the raid? But one of my thoughts was, you know, having played through the Mists of Pandaria remix, like, why can't we just get a scroll that we bring with us and we just hit that and it buffs the whole raid? So like, essentially, you just do away with the buffs on the class and you just bring a group of scrolls, kind of like you would potions. You hit the scrolls and now everybody's got the buff. So you don't necessarily have to plan on bringing specific classes for buffs. You bring specific classes based on what players you have and what players want to play and what's doing good, etc. Like, to me, that just seems like a much better, maybe not a better, but a much simpler solution to fix this problem. And honestly, I'm going to go in on a few things here where there's a few things from Remix that overall are just better. They're doing it better than live. So after that, that was the last thing I had queued up on this. But one of the other things they went in talking about, what was it? They were talking about healing and especially hybrid healing. There's a lot of things you can talk about with healing right now. Obviously the defensive problem, a lot of the healing problems, and you know, the yo-yoing from, you know, from the health bars. Automatic Jack's another one who's kind of made a lot of great points on that. I'm not going to beat that horse any more than already has been. I'm just going to move on and just kind of go off of what I kind of wrote down here. One of the things I wrote down was, especially for hybrid healing, like to me, hybrid healing, Fistweaver feels absolutely amazing. I mean, you hit Jadefire Stomp and then you do melee abilities and get healing from that. Like, absolutely a good time. At least for me. It keeps me engaged. I can do a lot of healing, but I can also watch health bars and add some healing. One of the things I will say with that is I picked up Voodoo during Dragonflight Season 3, which is an add-on that basically adds raid frames, and it's this right here. Kind of adds raid frames and, you know, for your whole group, and you can set buttons. So like if I left click, you know, for me, this is left click's Vivify, right click is your Renewing Mist. Adding that completely changed the way this feels healing. Like the way healing feels in general. It made a astronomical difference. And it's unfortunate that Blizzard's UI can't be set up to do that with the raid frames we have. I know what their take is on that is, hey, they don't want to put the development time into it when an add-on can do it, but this is one of those little things, especially when you're playing AUG. So when I was playing AUG, I didn't do this at the way that Max talks about, where at the very top end, they may have 5 or 6 targets and they're tracking all of those targets, CDs and everything, and then buffing them in time. What I did was I just picked who are the top 3 DPS, you know, because you had that tier set to give you the third prescience. And so I picked the top 3 DPS and I set them in line. This one's number 1, this one's number 2, this is number 3 with Voodoo. And this is, and I clicked their names on this to add prescience to them. And so I ran triple prescience all of Dragonflight Season 3. You know, and it made it 1,000 times easier. But that's one of them things that, in my opinion, we shouldn't need. I'm kind of against all these custom UIs. I'll go into that later. Not that I'm against them in the sense of, hey, you shouldn't have your own personal setup UI. It's just there is a massive difference between someone who has all these UIs set up and someone doesn't. Like, even if skill wise you both were the same skill level, the person with this full custom UI and, you know, Healbot, Voodoo, whatever, is going to outperform the person who doesn't every single time. And that's a problem that Blizzard really needs to, they need to get off their backside and they need to solve that. Like that's kind of one of them unacceptable things where your higher end level players are expecting that everybody has this. You know, I had a comment on my video the other day that said, wow, you know, someone who actually still clicks buttons. And I don't click buttons. I've got a Razer Naga that I use, and I use that for most of it. I do click some, but the majority of it's done on these 9 buttons over here. But it's a astronomical difference healing with this. So, but for the most part, this healing kit is just these buttons right down here at the bottom. It's keep this up and hit these 3 buttons repeatedly. You've got some incoming damage coming in. Get this out. Get this out. You kind of have a little bit of an oh crap button with Shaylin's gift there. This is your life cocoon, which is kind of like your bop on your tank, or your bop, you know. And then your group heal right here, your big group heal. And it's very, very simple for the most part, but having the few things, I've only got like 6 buttons set up on Voodoo for this. And like I said, it's Vivify, Renewing Mist, Enveloping Mist, Life Cocoon, and Detox. Detox and Thunder Brew Tea here set up on this to use this with mouse clicks and shift click. a lot of it you could just macro to your shift or control buttons and probably be fine. But compared to a discipline priest, this class does the same thing, maybe not as well as a discipline priest does, because a discipline priest is just highly sought after if you can play that at the highest level. But the way Fistweaver does that is just better. It's just better, like in almost every way. Because you just kind of do the rotation. You've got your buttons. And I think one of the suggestions I made for Discipline Priest was to take Power Word, what is it? Power Word Radiance, I believe it is, that puts your atonements out. But instead of that being a cast on whoever's around you or whoever's around the whatever you're targeted on, why can't that be like Jadefire Stomp where it does damage and then it just kicks out 5 of your atonements? Like, and then you just keep doing your buttons. So now you're not having to switch targets, you're not having to change targets, you're not having to focus different things. You just hit the button, do your damage, and keep pumping heals out. Like, I don't know. But that's one of the comments I left on the priest Discord or the priest forums for the War Within testing. Let's see. One of the other things that was mentioned, Dratnos had mentioned this, I believe. It was Dratnos that mentioned this. It was either him or gosh, I can't think of the other dude's name, but the normal guy they have here. Let me pull this down. Had mentioned that in ESO or Elder Scrolls Online, like a lot of, and I'm not, don't quote me on this because I don't know, but what they had said was, I think all the roles, your damage, your healer, and your tank basically had some ability to do healing. And vice versa with your healers being able to do some damage. And essentially, like in my mind, what that means is much like the Fistweaver. By clicking damaging abilities, even though I'm a healer, I still get heals from them. The damage is much lower, but we still get raid-wide healing from this. To me, this is a much better system to where you have, and not everybody's going to want to do that, but for the most part, a lot of healers, if you could click a damage button and still get heals out of it, would absolutely love to do that. And vice versa, if you had damage dealers and even tanks that were able to do some low percentage of raid-wide healing, that kind of takes the load off the healers a little bit of keeping this whole thing alive. And I think if that's what these guys were meaning when they were talking about it in Elder Scrolls, to me that sounds like a far better system where you're contributing to all phases of the group staying alive regardless, and I think that would give Blizzard a little bit of ability to trim down on some defensives because your group is also doing some healing, so you wouldn't need all those big defensives. You also wouldn't need this massive spiky damage coming out. You can deal with a lot more like lower constant damage coming out because everybody's doing some healing, everybody's doing some damage. Like, to me, that just sounds like a better system. Now, I've heard the combat system, from one of the guys I watched. He said it wasn't that great in ESO, but he still enjoyed playing the game. So again, I'm just going based off what I heard from these guys and the idea that brought from that. So now I'm going to continue on here. I'm gonna talk about a little bit about the delves. This says delves hero talents. Oh yeah, the delves and the hero talents. The hero talents are really cool. I will give Blizzard that. They are very cool. Some of them do some great things, or they add some very great flavoring to some of these classes. I mean, and I'll use Priest as an example. Priest absolutely ate with that. I'm not even gonna look it up, but getting their entropic rift that they got is just, man, that thing looks beautiful. But one of the problems that I have with the
Like,
hero
why are you?
with the hero talents, with the dells, they spent a massive amount of time developing these when the game has areas that need to be fixed. And that should have been a greater focus before getting delves out the door. Like it, and Blizzard does this. They do this all the time. They kind of backed off of it for Dragonflight. The system that they really went to work on was just dragon riding. And okay, cool. You know, that added some really cool thing to the game. It really didn't affect combat a whole lot. Like, works great. But the delves and the hero talents have taken a lot of development time, to the extent that they're still working on them. Most of them are out, most of them are done for the most part, and there's just some light tuning going on, but there's some that are still, you know, some of this stuff's still kind of being worked on and tuned and trying to figure out, you know, they've still got to finish doing their warlock class. I think hunter's doing really good, and then shamans are praying for something, you know, at this point. But I just feel like they should have spent that time less on the system and more on the game itself. And like I said, this has been a reoccurring theme with Blizzard forever, for at least all the way back to Legion, where adding a system every time, even though everybody's like, man, do we need the system? Can we just fix the game? And delves are, you know, looks like something that's taken from ESO to an extent, from Elder Scrolls Online. Could it potentially be some great content? Yes, but you know, they keep saying, oh, the target audience is the more casual player. And unless they do some retuning, I mean, you're not going to be getting very far in them delves. You're going to do an entry level delve, and then, you know, maybe a few positives beyond that. But there's going to be a lot of classes and a lot of specs that are going to struggle with some of those delves at some of the higher tier levels in those. And I personally felt like they could have spent that time somewhere else. One of the other notes I had said I almost need two teams, one for more of your casual, your normie content, your normie player content, and one for the top percentage. And I'm sure they do have this to some extent. They've got a bunch of different teams inside of Blizzard, but what I'm meaning is a lot of this content is designed, the fights and everything are designed from top down. How are the best players in the game going to handle it? And then let's detune it for the casual player, versus building it up for the casual player and then saying, okay, we need another team to take over from Mythic, and you guys just do the Mythic part of the raid. And you tune it for those players. So that way, heroic, normal, and LFR are kind of a more of a casual based player design. And then Mythic's your, you know, like your really, really hard content. And it's really hard right now, but again, they're having to design the whole raid. and they'll tell you they don't do this, but you can see in the way it's designed, the way these fights are designed, they're designed for them to be a challenge for Echo, for Limit, for Liquid. They're not designed for, you know, your average gamers who work 9 to 5 and then come home and play for an hour or two a day. They're not. They are 100% designed for these guys, and then detuned from there, and that's causing a lot of problems in WoW in general. I think WoW in general has a significant potential to build a lot of content for casual players and literally just have a second team that ramps that content up for the 1% and lets them cook on it so these guys can go in there and get the challenge that they really want. Oh yeah. So one of the ideas I had with that is, like, let's say you get to a +10 mythic dungeon or you get to mythic rating. If they design the content for your more casual players, what they could do at those high levels is the moment you step into a +10 or a +11 or a mythic raid, maybe you get it's kind of like a debuff on like your Aug Evokers and that kind of stuff in your other classes, where it nerfs them a little bit to go in against this content. So you can still design some of the fights to where they're mechanically heavy, but they don't necessarily need to just bash you in the ground. They can detune, like you take an Aug Evoker, because one of the things Max talks about here, where's it at? Right here is essentially for them, it's like take your best DPS, add 30%, and that's what your AUG is the equivalent of. Well, for an AUG to be good in a very casual player's hands, that's the way it has to be. But they could nerf this to where, hey, the moment you walk into Mythic, that AUG class and the other classes are taking a nerf to fight these mechanics at that point. Now, I would be interested to hear from someone like Max on what his thoughts on that would be. If that would be, I don't know that it would be perceived very well, and how he thinks that would actually feel. That would be an interesting conversation to have. Okay, continuing on. 113. Because someone asked a question here. We'll start with the question. Of course, I'm going to get a commercial.
All right, so this week we've got a Patreon question from Anonymous that says, "Hi, I'm currently a survival main. I really want to improve as a player in M+, but I struggle to get into keys because there's a lot of competition. I try to push my own keys, but they often get depleted, and I can't form a group because my schedule is inconsistent. Should I just start Fotm rerolling so I can get more experience in higher keys, or..."
By the way, for anyone who's not sure what he said, Fotm, which is your flavor of the month, so just whatever class is great for this season. I'll let him keep talking.
Just quit the game? Also, what's your favorite sandwich spreads? All right, we'll save the sandwich spreads for later, but let's start with should this person Fotm reroll, quit the game, or is there another option?
I have something quick before we give them I think you guys will be better at answering this question than me. I just want to say, if you're a survival main, you're going to absolutely love the new expansion. As far as I can tell from people who have played specifically survival since the last 2 weeks of Hunter reworks, is apparently that spec is cracked, and it is super fun. So you may just be able to keep playing survival, just wait a little bit longer. But that's all I have to add.
Growl, what's your take on Fotm rerolling? I know I've seen you on old Jangby quite a bit recently. That's a pretty Fotm reroll.
I mean, I think a lot of people are against Fotm reroller. Look, if you like playing your crap class and that's your identity, that's fine. But realistically, even if there's a god comp, there's 5 different classes across 3 different, 5 different specs across 3 different roles. Chances are there's going to be one of those that you'll find fun. In my opinion, the friction of dealing with Group Finder and having to do all that stuff is just not worth it to me, especially with how great gearing is nowadays, that I'm just such a big fan of Fotm rerolling. It's not to say it's not possible. If you really love your class respect, there are answers, which we'll probably get to in a second, that you can do. But, I mean, like you might literally Fotm reroll to a class and be like, actually, I love this. Like, you know, you go from survival to like, oh, why don't you just try Resto Druid for a season? Like, what could the worst that happens, right? You just don't like it, and then you play something else. Like, but who knows? Maybe you really like it. Like, maybe it's a refreshing way to enjoy M plus, and now you don't have to, you know, especially if you're on a tight schedule. I don't understand these people that.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop it there before he continues on. So flavor of the month re-rolling, I did this a lot in Dragonflight. I started out on a mage, or I started on a demon hunter. Really didn't like it when I was leveling up, so I switched over to my mage because mages almost always got some sort of fun with it. Played mage up until about mid season 2 when they did the Shadow Priest rework. Went into Shadow Priest because, you know, I'm a long time Shadow Priest, and anytime it's going to be good, I'm going to want to jump in and try to play it. Season 3, I moved over to AUG. I also played a little bit of Warrior, played a little bit of Warlock during these times, a little bit of Paladin. Mostly just LFR geared those tunes. Got into AUG pretty heavy. And then at the end of Season 3, I was doing a little bit of PvP when I came across the Fistweaver monk. And I thought, you know, let's give that a try. I had played it a couple different times throughout since Monk had come into the game, and I really just hadn't liked Monk at all. And when I got in and started playing it, I was like, man, I actually enjoy this for the first time ever. So I made that switch over to doing Fistweaver and have had an absolute blast with it. So yeah, to some degree, doing a little bit of flavor of the month re-rolling can be good because you get to try some different things. But if you're also someone who's like, you got an hour or two a day, but you're trying to get some gear, I don't know. I think it's kind of crap that you know, the advice you're getting is really just, oh, go play a god comp spec. You know, like I I did it, like I said, just to try some of those other classes, just because that's what I wanted to do. But if that's not what you want to do, like, you shouldn't have to do that. Again, some of the stuff I've said previous in this video, you know, like, hey, let's bring scrolls for buffs. Let's bring gosh, there was something else. But the scrolls for buffs, and there's a few other things they could do to make it more manageable to bring all your classes. I think the big thing for me in this whole takeaway, number one, I'm not a M plus advocate. It's a great way to get in and get gear, get it fast, and then be done for the season. But overall, if I could get the same level of gear from LFR, I would much rather do that. And that brings me to a point of talking about the casual design, like a more of a casual design mentality, or normal mentality, or normie, you could call it. I think about Remix. Remix has a constant upgrade system. You can upgrade all the way up to a certain item level. You can run LFR all day, every day, and I think they probably should still put that on a weekly lockout. Like, but you should be able to do your LFR, should be able to do your dungeons, and you know, hey, once you're locked out, you're locked out, kind of thing. You know, just leave the lockouts alone where they are. But being able to upgrade gear all the way up to, I would say, either just under Mythic or right at Mythic. And then Mythic, the only way you can get Mythic gear would be to do that higher end content. I think would probably be a better system for the overall average player. There's going to be some pushback from that, and people saying, oh, well, you're just trying to make the game more built for casuals. And it's like, to some degree, yeah. I mean, World of Warcraft could have a lot broader player base if that was the case. You know, because you could do any content you wanted and be endlessly upgradable all the way up to the mythic level. Because nobody below the mythic level cares that much until you get to the mythic level. And then those people care about being the top of the top. And that's why I think that's where you cut it off at. Though I also think they should, whatever token that you can get that would upgrade you all the way to that point. Me personally, I would prefer if they gave us the ability to do what we're doing in Remix, where we can go in and buy the class tier set or the, you know, just the visual appearance for Mythic. I don't want to go back in with my monk right now and run, you know, like I said, run was it +8, +9 for Aspect Crest when I don't even want to do Mythic Plus. I really don't want to go into Mythic Raid. I could do probably the first 2 or 3 bosses and be fine. But I would really like to have that appearance they have. And I think if Blizzard tied more of that repeatable content like LFR, your normal heroic and what is it? You know, Dungeon Finder, to being able to get gear and to get cosmetics, they would see a massive influx of people doing those. And the same with, you know, hey, you get those same tokens from, you did Outdoor World content. Great. You got it. You got tokens from that as well. The same token, same crest, same whatever it is, the same currency to buy those transmogs and stuff. And the reason I say that is the transmog of the mounts are such a powerful driver for World of Warcraft that people have been in, mock remix for 30 plus days, every single day, doing the same content over and over and over, just so they can have those transmogs and stuff. And I think if you leave the lockouts alone as they are on live, so you can't run LFR every single day, you can only run it once a week. I think that's obviously a better system. But that means over the whole of an expansion, you should be able to get enough tokens to go in and buy all the transmogs you want. And I personally don't see why that's a big issue. I know originally, like, it used to be, hey, if you saw someone in heroic gear, you knew that they were playing hard level content. If you saw someone in mythic gear, you knew that they were doing, you know, the top of the top. They were doing the most, you know. And that's not necessarily true anymore, simply because of the way the gearing system is now. And for the most part, like I said, I think most of these top players care less about having the best appearance and probably more about having the best gear. So even if you have the same appearance, their gear is that much better, and they also can do the harder content. And I think, again, that's where I think Blizzard's focus needs to be more on that for the whole of World of Warcraft. I think that would give World of Warcraft a much better base for the casual player, for the 80-90% of players who play this game, you know. A couple other quick things. One of the notes I've got here was from the Poddy C episode 28, 29 minutes and 51 seconds in. They were talking about how mid the tier sets were. Personally, I think the tier sets were probably very mid for the beginning of the expansion. because they were spending, they've been spending so much time on these hero talents, rebalancing classes, reworking classes, and doing delves. But they really didn't. It was kind of like, let's just put some basic stuff on these tier sets and move on, you know? Kind of understand that, but it kind of comes back to my point of, did we need another system? You know, I don't know that we did. Poddy C, episode 28. So that same episode, 16 minutes and 30 seconds in. They're talking about healer and tank DPS trinket reduction. And while we all kind of understand what the thought process is on that, my question is, number wise, how bad is that for something like the disc priest and fistweaver monks? Is losing that extra DPS going to cost us healing at the same time? Because if so, that's really just kind of a, you know, kick to the groin kind of thing. A couple other minor things I wanted to address with this video was melee range reduction. I totally understand why they did a melee range reduction, except for we did a range reduction because they felt that was getting out of hand, but paladins can hit you from 25 yards away. You know, some of their abilities hit from further away than an evoker, which is a ranged DPS, can stand and do their damage. Like, that absolutely makes no sense. But I believe it was either Max, Dratnos, or one of these guys said in a previous video, hey, if you're going to do a melee range reduction, that's fine. But can you make the hitboxes a little bigger, especially in raids, so we're not all stacked up on top of each other and we can actually see the floor and stuff underneath our feet? Great point. Makes sense to me. And it's something that really needs to be looked at. And speaking of stuff on the floor, so anytime you have a swirly or a visual, like, hey, there's damage coming to this spot, and this started back in Legion, those area of effect spots have been doing damage outside their visual. I left a little feedback note on that for Blizzard, but that's something that really needs to be fixed. Like, there's zero reason you stepped out of damage and still got hit by damage. Like, that's dumb. And it's one of them things, especially for new players coming in, like, they're not going to expect that, then they're just going to get smashed for it. Like, that's stupid. That's one of them things they can easily fix. Like, hey, you bring the damage is actually inside the visual. So if you step outside the visual by one step, you're out of the damage. It's just kind of the way it should be. Back to casual gameplay. I'll kind of pick on Max a little bit here because he said he basically doesn't play World of Warcraft for the story. You know, that's fine. There's a lot of people who don't. I've got one of my best friends who, you know, didn't really ever read the quest, just kind of went through, played the game, and got to level cap and went into raiding because that's what he wanted to do. I totally get it. But for me, this is an RPG game. And with an RPG game, you know, should come storied content. And I'm going to be completely honest, Blizzard has not done a good job with storied content since Legion. I haven't played the War Within content. I haven't looked at any of it yet. There was some rumor that the story is kind of short. If so, again, I come back to looking at delves, and I'm like, I would have chopped delves for story, more storied content. I would have chopped it in a heartbeat. We really haven't had great storytelling since Legion, and Legion had a whole lot of story with artifact weapon stories, etc. And I feel like there's definitely some things that they could do with that. For one, new players coming in, once you hit level 10, you know, hey, you're kind of recognized as like a champion of your class. Well, like that artifact quest line that we had, if you take out all the filler and you just have just the champion part of the quest line, you know, what, like for a monk, it was the Grandmaster to get the Grandmaster title. You take out all the little things like with the followers and all that stuff, and you just have the main portions of that. That should kind of be your next step in like your 10 to 20 or 20 or maybe your 10 to 30 or whatever it is building you up in this RPG game to really being that champion of your class. And I don't know why Blizzard hasn't really grabbed a hold of that. Yeah, you'd have to come in and rework a little bit of the content a little bit, but that should be, you know, hey, we're bringing you in, there's a big threat, we need you to, because you're an extremely talented paladin, you know, and we need you to be the next champion of paladins. We're going to send you after this really crazy artifact weapon that was held by other champions of, you know, champion paladins, you know, great historical paladins, and we want you to pick that up and kind of carry that torch forward, you know. And I feel like Blizzard's really missing on not getting that in the game for your casual player base. As far as storytelling goes, BFA, for instance, BFA had a relatively good story. Some of the Drustvar content really should have been continued on. There was great potential there that they kind of swung and missed on, but truthfully, at the end of Legion, I thought we were getting basically the X-Pack that we're getting now. I thought we were getting a void-themed X-Pack, and then we went into BFA. It was like a giant left turn from what we were seeing at the end of Legion. And that's sad because some of the pre-patch stuff that we've got so far, you know, like with Locust Walker. The last time we saw Locust Walker really was in Legion. Well, Legion happened in 2016 to 2018. So it's been at least 6 to 8 years. It's been 6 years since we've seen that character, since they followed up on any of this content. And I don't know why Blizzard continually does that, where it's like 6 years later, we'll continue this story. And it's really hard to hold on to a casual player base for an RPG, which is a role-playing game, if your story is so broken that it takes 6 years to get the next piece of the pie, you know, the next piece, the next chapter in the book. Instead, you just hand them a completely different book, and then they start reading that, and they're like, well, what happened to all this other stuff? And you're like, don't worry about it. You know, it's kind of like the sword and the constant what sword, you know? Like that's something that they should have taken care of when they had the chance. And the void thing, you know, like I said, if they had gone to a straight void expansion post Legion, it would have made sense, because that's what we were seeing as in-game content in Legion at the end of Legion. But back to BFA. BFA's story was actually pretty good. The problem was you had to play both an Alliance and a Horde character to get the full story. And that's not something that should have ever happened. It was the same thing that they did in Shadowlands. You couldn't actually get the full story until you played through each one of those covenants. You shouldn't have to play 4 characters through 4 covenants to get the main story. Like, again, this is a role-playing game, you know. What are we doing? If you've got storied content, you should be able to play. We should have played through each one of those, did the main storylines for each one of those covenants. Then you pick your covenant, and then you continue on doing their little task and building a renown for them. Like, that would have given us much better story early on than what we got. So what we got was basically with launch, you only got about a quarter of the total story, you know, of the main storyline. Like, that's that's a kind of a terrible way to portray what's going on in game. And then with Dragonfly, hey, they kind of start strong, but then it's like they give you a little bit of storied content, and then it would cut off and leave you with this question of, well, what's going on? It'd give you a little bit just to let you know kind of something was going on, and then it'd cut it off. And like, that's something that they really need to get back to work on, is telling the story of World of Warcraft. Because that story is what built this game. Way back when, there were a lot of people who played real-time strategy game, whatever. But with Warcraft, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, the story is what brought those people over from that to World of Warcraft. And a lot of people have come in just for raid, come in for, many different reasons, but a mass majority of your player base has come in for that storied content. And that's something they need to do better on. Now, with that, I'm sure there's going to be some pushback on this. Max mentions in this video cross-realm, cross-faction, and absolutely agree that needs to be more of a thing. Me personally, I'm absolutely over the faction wars. Is it cool to have factions? Yes, but me personally, if it was up to me, you would log into World of Warcraft, you would pick whatever race you want to play, and then you would pick, do I want to be Horde or do I want to be Alliance with this race? If I want to be a human that goes to the Horde, I can do that. You should be able to do that. It's a role-playing game, And there's going to be some argument to that, but like, worst case, hey, I'm a defector of the Alliance and I want to come over here and be a Horde, or whatever it is, whatever your story is, the RPG element for you. But overall, you should be able to go wherever you want to go. So if I want to be a human, but I want to play with all my friends who are Horde, I should be able to go do that. It shouldn't be, at this point, there's zero reason for it to be the way it is. So, I still think having some factions is fine, but like I said, we should be able to talk to each other for the most part outside of PvP content. Like in PvP, that's where the language barriers should, the languages that they have in game should crop up and so you can't understand what each other's saying in the game. Totally get that. The rest of the time, if you're an Alliance player, you see a Horde player and you're out and, doing a super bloom right now, you should be able to talk to that person without being grouped up. Like there's no reason you can't, because we see that with the heroes of the game in the story as it is. They all talk to each other, even if they're showing up and they're not on good terms, like they were in Mist of Pandaria when they all showed up, stopped at the garage. They were still talking to each other. They could understand each other. Like, it's kind of silly, but that's all I'm going to say about that. Shadow Priest. I'm going to speak on the Shadow Priest because that's one of my favorite classes. They've absolutely cooked on it. It's very visually, it's beautiful in game right now. I think the biggest problem it has is it's almost got an identity crisis where it's fighting between being a Shadow Priest and a Void Priest. I understand that Shadow comes from the Void in the cosmological chart that they have, but it's like you're picking between the two in this inside the class tree, and that's a little weird. The Void stuff looks great. It is kind of nice to have a choice, but overall, the identity for Shadow Priest, it's like I said, it feels like it's fighting itself. Also, one of the notes I left on the forums was Void form turning into Void Bolt. To my knowledge, this is the only class that has a cooldown that you hit and then it turns into an extra button on top of the already massive amount of buttons you've got. And they need to, the Shadow Priest needs some of those spells kind of baked together, because they're essentially doing the same things with slightly different visuals, and they're not really providing an enhanced gameplay at all. And that was kind of one of my notes with Mind Games. Mind Games, in my notes on, and it was right before they took it out, was, hey, this doesn't really add anything to the spec, to the class, outside of PvP. It's great for PvP, but beyond that, it's not really adding anything. It's just a random button you hit in your rotation every 40 to 50 seconds. Like, it just doesn't feel good. And it's kind of the same way, like I said, with Void Form. Void Form looks awesome. looks absolutely amazing. But the fact that it turns into an extra button in a rotation that's already got, generally you've got that lit up, you've got Void Torrent you need to press, and now with Void Torrent you have Entropic Rift that you need to feed Devouring Plague to. So you've probably got a Devouring Plague lit up, a Mind Blast lit up, and your Mind Flay / Mind Spike lit up. And all of those are fighting for number one position, and you have to know which one's doing the most DPS and get that out in that order. While also making sure you don't overcap on resources, making sure you don't end up with 2 stacks of Mind Flay, Mind Spike procced, so the insanity version of them, while hitting Void Bolt. Like, it's just silly. It's just silly that it added that extra button, because you already had a lot going on. You didn't need the extra button. And probably the last thing I'm going to bring up is back to the UI and add-ons. I believe it was like Max or somebody had a cook on this, where, basically like Asmon, they were reacting to Asmon saying that all the add-ons should be taken out. I don't think all the add-ons should be taken out. Personally, I like my damage healing meter here. Mainly just to see kind of where I'm at in the, in comparison to other people. And it's something that I strive for in raid. That's what keeps me going, Voodoo's great, but it's something we shouldn't need. A lot of these UIs, these custom UIs, are something that I personally don't think we should need in the game. I understand why we have them. I'll give you a great example, which is like warlocks, and what they call them is buffs, or they've got a class timer where they've basically got their character here, and then there will be a big, what looks like unstable affliction, a big, it's not corruption, it's the other dot that they've got here for like an affliction lock, and it's counting down how many seconds inside there are left on those dots, so you know when to refresh them without having to look over it at your target, so your little target identifier, and see what that little bitty button is doing. So that little bitty button can be hard to see with all the things that are going on in the raid, and it's really bad in this raid, especially at the heroic level. I'll be interested to see how they tune down normal and LFR, but that's a totally different conversation. But those are things you shouldn't need. That should be provided like in the Blizzard toolkit. Like, hey, these dots are, you should be able to put that wherever you want it, and it should be a big giant button so you can see, hey, these dots are coming off. They've got X amount of seconds, whatever. With Monk, especially with Windwalker, there's the buff that comes over here, and once you get to 10 stacks, you then hit your it's not Fist of Fury, but that's essentially what it is. But you hit that button, and it does, increase damage based off of that. Well, tracking that inside of all of the other buffs that are going on over here is an absolute pain. And again, that's why a lot of these people will have a custom UI, will be just for stuff like this. So that buff gets moved down here so they can see when it hits 10 stacks and then press the button without having to chase it all over the screen or look through what are 15 rolling buffs that are falling off and coming on at once to see what's going on. But again, my point is that should be in the Blizzard toolkit. Like, there's no reason I'm having to go outside of Blizzard's toolkit for that. And my cook on this is just simply, you shouldn't need all these custom UI interface things. You should you shouldn't need them. But like I said earlier, if I grab the, two people of the exact same skill level, or even the same person of the same person, put him on the exact same class, I give him the Blizzard interface here, and then I give him one that's, hey, a full weak aura kit with a full custom UI, LBUI, and all that stuff. The guy with the LBUI, guy or girl, whoever, would literally outperform their selves with the stock UI. Will they be able to do really well with the stock one, or the Blizzard, the non-custom interface? Absolutely, they'll be able to do really well. But they will outperform themselves with that custom UI every single time. And so what that does is that creates a massive gap in players who are using that versus not using that. Especially if you go into PvP. If you're a newer player, you go into PvP at level cap, and you're using this because you don't know any better, and you get against a guy who's got a full custom interface with mouse over and all that stuff, that other person's going to obliterate you. Absolutely obliterate you. And that's, then you hear people, oh, well, you should just get good. Like, getting a custom interface to tell you everything isn't necessarily getting good. Like I said, even if you have the same skill level, the person on this is not going to perform as well as if they had a full custom UI with all the buffs and everything telling them. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Let me look here at my notes. Yeah, that was really all I had for this. So thank you guys for watching. And, like I said, if there's any feedback, I would appreciate it if you'd leave some comments down below. What are some of your thoughts? What are some of your suggestions? If you disagree, that's fine and dandy. We can talk about it again. If you disagree, I would hope you would leave a solution or a, not just say, hey, I disagree, but give me something back that I can look at and think about and say, oh, maybe they do have a really good point and a really good idea here, and that would work better than what I said. Because stuff like that we can eventually take to the forums, take to these Blizzard, testing, and we can put that in there and give them some good solid feedback that maybe they can take and implement into the game and hopefully make this a better game for everybody playing. But that's what I had. Thank you guys, and catch you in the next video.